You're listening to episode 76 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Tara Healey joins us to speak about developing a world-class mindfulness program in the corporate world. When you attend a mindfulness program on your own, perhaps MBSR or MBCT, you will probably find yourself in a heterogeneous group of fellow participants. Everyone is there from a different background and for different, though sometimes overlapping reasons. When attending a program at work, however, there's a shared experience of being employees within that environment, and that can change your experience. There are particular cultural norms which may be taken into account, particularly in the corporate world. Tara Healey, Master's Ed in Health Education, is a longtime practitioner of mindfulness meditation with over 20 years' experience in organizational development. Tara is the architect of Harvard Pilgrim's program adapting the principles of mindfulness meditation to a corporate environment. The comprehensive suite of mindfulness courses developed at Harvard Pilgrim has been conducted at corporate worksites including Google, Harvard Medical School, Sun Life Financial, Springfield College, and Smith College. Additionally, Tara has been a featured presenter for the Northeast Human Resources Association, the Center for Mindfulness' 9th Annual International Scientific Conference, the Omega Institute for Holistic Studies Creating a Mindful Society Conference, and several American Heart Association Go Red for Women events. In 2006, Tara was qualified to teach mindfulness-based stress reduction by the Center for Mindfulness in Medicine, Healthcare, and Society at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. Most recently, Tara has expanded Harvard Pilgrim's mindfulness program to include e-learning resources and oversees the Mind the Moment website and Facebook page. Our guest today is Tara Healey. Tara, thank you so much for being here.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for asking.
It's so wonderful to have you on the podcast because I've been aware of the work you've been doing at Harvard Pilgrim for quite some time. And it was such a delight to run into you at a workshop recently on the topics of diversity and inclusion and to be able to arrange this. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you.
So let's start by having you tell us about your background.
Sure. I'll give you a little bit of my personal background, a little bit of my professional background, because I think contextually it kind of weaves into how I wound up where I did. Personally, I've had a long time interest in meditation and really how the mind worked. And literally, this is going back to, when I was like 10, 11, 12 years old. And I would notice that my mind produced thought. And I found that very interesting because it wasn't as if I was trying to create thoughts. It was like there were thoughts just kind of being secreted that I didn't have much to do with. And I was curious if this is how minds worked. Was this just my mind having a lot of thought, or did other people have minds like that? And I would say that's really kind of the very earliest notion I had about this capacity to actually observe ourselves, observe how our minds worked, and begin to see thought as a phenomenon that would arise and sort of have a life and would move. And that was very different from kind of consciously applying my attention to something where I had to, problem solve. This was sort of more the rumination that had me really curious. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit, but when I was in high school, because I had talked so much about meditation and the mind and had this curiosity. And by the way, I guess what I would also add, because I think this is important, is that I was a very happy child. I felt like I had quite a lot of joy. So I wasn't necessarily coming at this from a place of despair or suffering, which is not uncommon to hear. But that really wasn't my experience. It was much more curious. So my mom bought me a book on meditation, which I would read and, was just so interested in. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit more, Ted, to the late 80s when I read a book called Seeking the Heart of Wisdom. And it was co-authored by Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield. At that time, they were not known to me. I had no idea who they were, but I randomly pulled that book off the shelf because I loved the title and that had me curious. And only to find out that they had started a retreat center that was in my home state of Massachusetts. From that point on, from that book, I remember reading that book from cover to cover and feeling really profoundly influenced. Like, this was how I had been thinking about things for so long. And it's actually put in kind of a structure and a format that made perfect sense to me, just complete sense. There was nothing I needed to believe that I could actually test all of this out for myself. And it had really huge appeal for me. And so after spending quite a lot of years sort of reading, and I would also look at different meditative traditions, but I kept kind of coming back to insight, always coming back. So I started in the mid-90s going to the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies, which is really where I started. I would take courses weekend, 5-day, day-long. And then in the late 90s, I started to go to the Insight Meditation Society, which was the center that founded by Jack and Joseph and Sharon.
And right next door to BCBS.
And I had, quite truthfully, I felt a little bit scared of going, or I was like, oh no, that, I'm not ready for that. But, only to find out that, it was just intensifying the practice, which was incredibly valuable. And then I just started sitting annually. And then somewhere around 2004, 2005, I actually started going pretty much every 6 to 8 months. I would go and sit a retreat and work with a whole variety of teachers, and was pretty profound. So that's kind of a little snippet of my retreat history, my practice history, my interest in meditation. Now, professionally, I have a graduate degree in health and wellness and started working for Harvard Pilgrim in 1987. So right around the same time I found that book, Seeking the Heart of Wisdom, I started working for Harvard Pilgrim as a health educator. And I was developing, designing, and teaching a whole variety of health wellness prevention programs for members of what was then Harvard Community Health Plan. And I worked with somewhere between 10 and 12 women in this kind of wellness arena. It was absolutely fabulous. And I did that for 2 years and then transitioned into training and organizational development because basically what happened is they disbanded that particular department, and most of us were really put into different positions within the company that matched our skill set. And so I wound up being part of human resources and working as an organizational development consultant, which was a big chunk of my career at Harvard Pilgrim was in the OD field. And that was really an amazing opportunity for me to begin to integrate some of these practices into some of the courses that I was teaching in a very natural way, kind of helping people see when they get hooked or when they're provoked, when they're feeling overwhelmed, how to really self-regulate. And so I would integrate some of the breath work and body awareness in really natural ways in a number of, not all the classes that I was involved with teaching, but in some of the one-on-one coaching I was doing with managers. And people were incredibly receptive. And I don't know that I ever mentioned the word mindfulness or meditation kind of in the early days, but yeah.
But you did say something very important here. A word that stood out for me in this was integration. And that's something that there's sometimes a perception that if one takes a mindfulness course or does a meditation practice or some contemplative practice, that it's this separate thing. You have your formal meditation time, and then you turn off and you go into the rest of your world, and there isn't a connection between the two. So I'm very glad to hear that this building it into the rest of your life. It's not just about the time on the cushion. It is about putting it in the rest of your life. That's why we do the cushion time. It was very important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like, a little mini teaching from Shinzen Young that I love and I integrate into my teaching often is that, and exercise is a common analogy, and he used it, but in a way that I hadn't heard, which is basically saying, you pick an exercise. If you want to increase strength and flexibility in your body, you pick an exercise and you do it for a certain number of days for a certain amount of time. And during that time, you are developing abiding traits in your body so that you are strong and flexible, not just when you're actually performing that exercise activity, but you are actually employing that strength and flexibility in the service of your life.
Exactly. And thank you for quoting Shinzen. Excellent teacher.
I really love so much of his teaching, and that one in particular, this idea of, and when we're practicing formal meditation, we're developing abiding traits in our capacity to be awake and aware so that we employ that in the service of our lives.
And that's one of the things I wanted to approach with you a little bit later on is this idea of these corporate programs. Well, they're a light touch, and really it's not this true thing. The right way to do it is this. And I think this exercise metaphor is a very good one, and we'll come back to that. But I wanted to ask right now about this combination, this confluence of your professional and your personal practice. How did the idea to start a program at Harvard Pilgrim come about?
Well, again, quite unexpected. Back in 2004, I was informally coaching a manager at Harvard Pilgrim, specifically around mindfulness and meditation. And she knew that while I didn't talk about going off to sit retreats, only if somebody asked me, she actually knew that I had been sitting meditation retreats and practicing mindfulness, and she wanted to know more about it and asked if I would work with her and, just a couple times a week, sit together and teach her about meditation. And I said, sure, so that was one thing that was going on. There were a number of factors that came together to kind of form the perfect scenario for offering this at work, because back in 2004, this was not a topic that was on the cover of Time magazine or Scientific American. Nothing like that. The other thing that happened, I was doing the informal coaching. I was also co-chairing a committee of employees with the VP of HR. So the two of us co-chaired this group of employees cross-section across the organization, from, finance to customer service to, HR, just a whole variety of departments represented. We'd meet monthly to talk about employee morale and engagement, and then feed that up to senior leaders. And senior leaders also used this group to kind of run ideas by. And it was a really it was a group that ran quite well. People were vocal. They felt complete trust to say whatever they wanted to say. And at that time, there was a fair amount of stress. People were feeling overwhelmed and like they had a lot to do. And I felt that, introducing the practice of mindfulness could be one kind of piece of the pie toward addressing this feeling of being overwhelmed. And healthcare is, it's not, there's so much going on. I think most industries could have a similar argument, that there's a lot happening. So I felt that this would be, just a slice of the pie of, introducing people to the practices while there were other more systemic approaches, different things happening in addition to this to help get at how best to support employees.
I think that's a very important point that you're raising, Tara, is that this practice that we do is one of many things that can help people who are dealing with difficulties, whether it's stress in the workplace or loss or physical pain or tremendous changes in a very short amount of time, whatever it happens to be. Mindfulness is one thing that can help, but we always want to be a little careful about recommending it as the only course. There are other things as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was really clear with the VP and she agreed that, there are other things that need to be addressed and looked at, but this is certainly one modality that's worth investigating. And, because I, at that point, had been practicing for a number of years, I knew that I would have the prereqs to go through the mindfulness-based stress reduction training. And I had long known about John's work. And so I, said to the VP, I would like to do this program, but I actually don't want to teach MBSR in the workplace because I don't think it's going to fly. You're not going to get that kind of time. It's just not going to work. And what I'd like to do is take my OD background, sort of skill around curriculum design and instruction, and just adapt it so that we can offer this in a workplace environment. So I went out there, did the training, went through kind of the 8-week course, and then I did the practicum, and then I came back to Harvard Pilgrim. And basically, we ran our first program in 2006, and we mixed it up very consciously by age, race, gender, and level in the company. And so the idea being that we wanted a cross-section of staff, that suffering levels the playing field, and that people are going to be entering this room around their shared humanity and not around a particular label.
That's beautifully said, and so wonderfully reflects this idea of having a heterogeneous group going through it. There's such tremendous learning that occurs from these differences, and that diversity is a strength.
Absolutely a strength. And it was really, for us, well, one of the other interesting things is that when we decided to offer this program, the VP said to me, Tara, let's do this and not tell anybody. Let's not go to the senior leadership team, of course, of which there was a senior leadership team. Let's not go to them. Let's just do this thing. We'll collect some pre-post and 6-month out data. We'll get our market research folks involved to design a tool based on some of the kinds of things we want to find out. And we'll just keep it under the radar. And that's exactly what we did, Ted. I mean, we got market research involved. We designed a tool, ran the course way under the radar. But what happened, and much to my surprise, and I will tell you honestly that I loved my job doing as an OD person in HR, absolutely loved it. I had no idea that this program was going to go viral within our company, which is what happened. So we did that class, and then what happened is they represented a whole variety of different areas within Harvard Pilgrim. So then people would start calling me and sending me emails and saying, well, when's this next thing? I want to know more about it. So then every quarter, in addition to doing my OD work, I would offer this 6-week class, and did that, gosh, right through, 2006 to 2008. And then at that point, that was a really pivotal point at the end of 2008, because we had some really good data points that this program was well received, that people found it actually profound in many ways, that they had never really noticed how much they were controlled by the voice in their head, as Dan Harris says, and that it was actually something that they didn't have to necessarily believe, or this practice would actually give them some skills of kind of discriminating between, what's a helpful, useful way to be thinking about something and what is just not either, fully based in reality, possibly not true, needs to be questioned. So many people had not really looked at their minds, and many found it very unsettling. But the unsettledness actually was something that I could really guide them with, like to actually turn toward it and feel the physical expression of anxiety and unsettledness rather than distracting yourself. And, for many people there, it was such a change, because they were so afraid often of some of the anxious feelings that would arise in practice, that they thought this idea of turning toward it would exacerbate it, only to find that when they actually did this, and that they could hold it, that they had the capacity. And so I think in a lot of ways it really helped to build confidence around one's capacity to deal with parts of their lives that are have caused them pain, have caused them suffering. It has, supported them in being much less reactive. And, certainly, so many stories about, seeing a provocation arise and not giving it the strength, so it's not like those things stop happening to a particular person depending on what their own habit pattern might be, but the hook is less, like they have more space. So it's beginning to see, oh, there you are. I know you. There is that. There you are. Okay. And I actually can be in the driver's seat with this one rather than be hijacked.
You're not in the back seat as the automatic pilot takes you somewhere that is maybe not as helpful as if you were actually driving and aware.
Very well put. Yes. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So
what was the next big phase in the development of the program? What happened next?
Yeah, thank you. So what happened next is that because we had so much data at that point where people were saying, this is really valuable. And not only is it helping me professionally with relationships and, just the capacity to do my work, it's actually helping me at home. So at that point, right around early 2009, there was a decision between the leadership of HR and the leadership of what is our medical management area at Harvard Pilgrim. And that's a big umbrella term for lots of different things. So like our measurement comes under medical management, and our health and wellness programs come under that as well. And so they said, this seems to be well accepted by our own employees. How about if we start bringing it out to the companies that purchase our health insurance, and many of them who are already utilizing some of our health and wellness programs. And we, in a way, came in through that angle of it. The mindfulness program came under the health and wellness umbrella. At the same time, I'm bringing an organizational development lens because of my background, and also my history of work at Harvard Pilgrim had been in that arena. So we wound up reaching out to a few of the accounts that had been offering quite a lot of our wellness programs and basically said, hey, we've got this new thing. It's called mindfulness. You've probably heard about it or seen it in Time magazine.
At this point, yeah, it would have progressed to be more, a little more mainstream.
Yep. At that point, 2009. So because we're a health insurance company, we of course have industry that covers the gamut from higher ed to finance to tech, hospitals, healthcare. It's everything. And so we reached out to probably about 3 or 4 companies, tech, finance, healthcare, and said, in higher ed, and basically said, you know what, would you be interested in trying this? And it's we kind of went out of the gate with a 6-week and with a 4-week, what we're calling 2.0 follow-up. So a lot of them said, sure, we would love to try it. And they did and had a lot of success with it. And now at this point, Ted, it's really starting to grow. I mean, in our culture, it's getting more recognition. It's getting more sort of validation. And it seems like it's more legitimate than it was 10 years ago. It's not that it is, but, some of the research has people, and I'm careful with any of the research. I say, it may do this. The research looks promising, but so much more needs to be done.
Absolutely. And that's one of the pushbacks that we often hear is about the hype, where a particular study, for example, that uses a program and sees an effect and publishes their work in JAMA or one of the other journals. And then the popular media gets it
Yeah.
and writes a headline that is not at all what the paper says or is about. So thank you for being very clear in your programming about your actual mileage may vary.
Yeah. It's a good way to put it. And the thing that I do emphasize, because I say, you know what, I can point you to some of the research if you're interested in looking at it and draw your own conclusions. But really, this is a practice that lends itself beautifully to being your own scientist and your own subject. And I emphasize that because for me, Ted, that was really where the rubber hit the road, is that I started to see that I was less contracted around, say, a family interaction that was painful or challenging. It was like, and the results over time, from my own experience were really imperceptible. I can remember thinking, especially early on, is this working?
Right. We're having a discussion on an online forum right now that is about an individual's a little concerned because they haven't had this huge transformational shift, and so many of us who are teaching are weighing in and saying, that's sometimes one grain of sand at a time in this hourglass, and it's not always a big bang. Sometimes, and quite often, it's a very subtle shift that is profound only over the course of time and effort that you put into it, like exercise, that metaphor you brought up before.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I do feel like practice and results are in are proportional to one another. I think that's one thing. And that I will emphasize in teaching that, really trust patience and discipline. So if you trust that there might be something to this, if you, and sometimes just starting with reading a little bit, like if you trust there might be something to it, then there has to be, and you're willing to discipline yourself to actually do this practice, what you want to just, and I always say too, like without expectations, just like a scientist and a subject where you are, sort of entering with a mode of curiosity, interest, receptivity to your own mind and body and see what happens over time. And the way to tell is what's happening in your life.
Put it to the test. That healthy skepticism is very helpful. Those are the folks who I have found get the most out of it because they're not just, they don't have preconceived notions that they're going with that may or may not fit the actual experience. They're approaching this from put this to the test and see what happens. That's where the effectiveness comes in.
Yeah, that's right. And in some ways, for some people, they like to see that there's a little bit of research that shows that, there are some changes in the brain. But I really emphasize that your direct experience, that is what should tell you if this is worthwhile or not. And bringing in a little patience into that mix is going to be really important for you.
So tell us about the suite itself and what the different programs are that you have.
Yeah, so we started, as I mentioned, it's really kind of our flagship program is this 6-week offering. That one little thing I'll say, Ted, when I first offered it, I did instead of 8 weeks, which is what MBS are, I did it in 7, and we met for an hour and a half once a week. And the feedback at the end was that these classes should be longer, both in time and in duration.
Which is surprising for people in a corporate world to say, no, 7 weeks and this kind of time commitment wasn't enough.
It's so true. And what I really can't, I sort of wrestled with it just a little bit. And then I realized that, what? If this was 10 weeks, it would not have been long enough because they just did not want to say goodbye. So I thought, what, it's going to be more palatable to do 6 weeks, and we'll do an hour or an hour and a half, just depending on, for some businesses, they absolutely will not go above an hour. So, we realized that we needed to flex. But what happened is that right around 2009 to the current is that we want, companies wanted also to have other options instead of, so if people had gone through the 6-week, they wanted to have other options. So essentially at that time, I was also hiring instructors. So we have 8 per diem instructors that work for us, and all of them teach the 6-week, and then there's a 2.0, which is a 4-week follow-up that is just, kind of the next level, includes quite a lot of practice, and the content of that 4-week is really driven by the participants and what they're finding in their practice. But then we went on to develop a suite of things. So we have what are called topics in applied mindfulness. So these are all 1-hour sessions. So we have something called managing daily stresses, a mindful approach to work. We have mindful communication, which is speaking and listening with awareness, mindfulness and emotional intelligence. We also have mindful movement for the office. And let's see. And then, the other thing is we've also got offerings for executives. So we have a mindful leadership program. And I'll say we are our program. And John and I, and really our program, we've partnered with Jeremy Hunter, who I don't know if you know Jeremy.
Yep, he's a good friend, Jeremy. You were both presenting together at the scientific conference a couple of years ago.
Oh yes, yep. So we've done a few presentations together and have kind of collaborated on a 1-day mindful leadership module that we've been able to test out with a finance industry.
Tara, who are the staff that you have working? What's that overall structure look like?
Yeah, so we're a small group, but as I mentioned, we fall under the category of medical management. And Tammy Ireland is the director of population health improvement. And so she's our direct boss. So she really is the person who supports and provides direction and counsel on our strategy and our program. And, she's really just a remarkable person in so many ways. I mean, she's so talented, understands the business of healthcare like nobody I know, and just a brilliant strategist. So she's oversees mindfulness the mindfulness program falls under her auspice. And then Jonathan Roberts is the operations manager, and he really makes this program run day to day. So he is the person who fields the requests. And for instance, when we get a request from, say, a law firm, that we are immediately going to go to the attorney on staff and see what her availability is. A finance company calls and we've got some staff who have finance backgrounds, and John will do that kind of matchup. He also matches up by geographic location. So, there's a lot of factors. He makes sure they get paid. And basically, he really takes my vision and makes it happen. I mean, I think, he said that the other day that in a lot of ways so he's detailed and organized and, I can't say, the program would not be what it is without John. We have two other, Karen Salvato and Angelique Sobel, and they are part-time staff to the mindfulness program. So they're full-time Harvard Pilgrim employees under the medical management umbrella, and a percentage of their time is devoted to mindfulness. And what they do, they are writers, editors, photographers, and just overall amazing thought partners. So it's not uncommon for Karen and Angelique and John and I to meet on a somewhat regular basis around planning and strategy. And Angelique in particular manages our Facebook page. So she's really kind of like our social media tech person. And she does a really wonderful job with Mind the Moment, which is Harvard Pilgrim's Facebook page for mindfulness. And then I'm the program director. So, but that's our staff. So we have arranged some discounts for a few programs, and this is all really part of our sustainability. And that is, we have a discount with Craving to Quit, with Headspace, with 10% Happier. We're in conversation related to a couple of other apps, but I won't mention that because it's not finalized. And the other thing is the Mindfulness-Based stress reduction program is we have a discount arrangement with the Center for Mindfulness for our members. Basically, what we've done at Harvard Pilgrim is we've allotted some space in a couple of our large buildings in our Quincy location and our Wellesley location, where there is a small conference room dedicated to practice all the hours that the building is open, so people can kind of come and go. And then we have a monthly meditation that's guided by me, and people log in at home, because we have a lot of people that work from home and have flex schedules. So they have a call-in number, but there's a number of people who also come and show up in the conference room, but those are really, really well attended. And these are things we also consult with our groups on, is that, meditation rooms, having a regular monthly guided sit that people can join, either through the web or live. The apps, another way to just keep the sustainability going. So the guided meditation, the apps, we have an online CEU program for clinicians. And that is something that Judd and I did almost 2 years ago, that was taped, recorded, and then put on BU School of Medicine website. It's a 3-hour, 3 CME CEU program. I've also done a live 4-week for clinicians. We have a 5-part pre-recorded video series that's on our website, so people can take that. I've also done, we had a company in the Midwest who just wanted an intro to mindfulness, and so I just did that live over the web. And, we'll work with companies also to figure out the best way to address some of their challenges and understand the culture of their company, so that we are providing not only the best suite of offerings, but what might be best for them in terms of the sustainability. We've also just developed a course called a Practice Leaders course, and that's just identifying people in a particular company who are likely new to practice, some of them not so new, and have them actually, not that they even need to lead practices, but they need to be responsible for setting a practice up, getting a room, and they can even just play like a tape or something. So they don't have to be the one to teach it. So those, that's like a few things that we've done to kind of keep these practices alive, and the online stuff, just, giving people access that might not easily have access, or they live in a remote location.
So what are some of the responses that you've gotten from participants? What are the effects that you're seeing in the workplaces, either at Harvard Pilgrim or some of your clients?
I can tell you from some of the Harvard Pilgrim responses. Now we collect data where, there are some organizations that honestly, they're not so data driven, believe it or not. They want to offer the program, and maybe they would do like a one sheet evaluation that we offer, or they have their own, but they're not all interested in it, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's a little odd. I wouldn't think so in the corporate world, but.
Yeah. I don't know if part of it is that with many of the companies that we work with, and by the way, we offer it to anybody. They don't have to be a Harvard Pilgrim employer group. They don't have to buy Harvard Pilgrim insurance. So we opened that up about 5 years ago to say, anybody can do this. But the majority of our clients are Harvard Pilgrim, and they already have a trusted relationship with us by virtue of the relationship of insurance and other wellness programs. So that, I think that has served us well. But we have asked questions around, and I'm not going to bore you with numbers, but I'll give you a sense of the questions and the trend. So we ask a question around distractibility. We ask questions around, when you're away from work, can you relax and not be constantly thinking about work? We ask a question related to their responsibility and sense of being overwhelmed. We ask about home and life work balance, productivity, kind of degree of annoyance or irritation during the workday, a sense of accomplishment. We want to know their sort of, and this is all pre and then post, focus, that you're able to kind of stick with one thing until you're ready to move on to the next and not be jumping around. When you're under pressure, are you able to treat others with respect? And we also ask a question about their, just maintaining their level of energy. Every single one of those trended in a positive direction, meaning that their post scores were improvement over their pre scores. And this was, at the end of the 6 week. And then we asked some questions related to, like, were the benefits you gained the ones you anticipated when you signed up? And about 76% say yes. But a number of them say that they actually were shocked and had no idea that they were going to receive some of the benefits that they did, which is why that number could look a little bit lower, because they had some ideas about what they might expect, but they had things happen positively that they wouldn't have expected.
Right. It didn't meet my expectations. It gave me things I wasn't asking for that I hadn't realized I needed. That's
exactly right. And, immediately after, 98.5% say they will continue practicing. We asked about just overall effectiveness. 86.9% felt like it has improved their just general effectiveness. And the question that I really cared a lot about was, do you feel participation in this course was a good use of your time? Because at work, giving the idea of, quote, giving up work hours to actually participate in this was a little unsettling for people, but 98.7% said that it was a good use of your time. And the N on this is 1,232.
Yeah, it's not a small sample size, and over 98% is a pretty good number to have.
Yeah, we're just about 99%. Right? Saying that, and then at 6 months, like 82% are still using the techniques and the meditations in the course. They're practicing, mean time of practice, about 15 minutes a day, 3 days a week. About 87% informally are remembering to apply. 96% continue to find this to be helpful.
I think that's a good segue for us into one of those questions we were tabling for a little bit, is on this being what is, compared to more traditional approaches, might be considered a bit lightweight. As we use this exercise metaphor again, one that comes up that was used very effectively by Jane Compton and Lynette Montero in an article in Mindful, the journal, not the magazine, saying, it's sort of like if you're exercising and you're just running a 5K, and people who are running marathons might disparage that or find that to be a very, you're not doing a marathon. And yet the folks who are running the 5K are seeing health benefits. It is a positive effect. And so I was wondering if you'd care to share some of your thoughts on that.
I am well familiar with kind of both sides of that conversation. And, I have been very, very interested in it. And I will tell you that I really fall on the side of that. Does it really matter as long as somebody is finding that these practices are improving the way they relate to and engage in their lives and reducing the amount of suffering they're experiencing, either from, not being able to get what they want, not having things exactly as they hoped, wanting something they can't have, having something they wish they didn't, like all of these things that create strife and suffering. If they're getting a little bit of relief from those things, then in my mind, that is incredibly beneficial and usually provides some kind of stimulation for continuing to understand this practice in a little bit more depth. But it's such an individual, personal experience. And for me, Ted, I will say that I actually feel that this conversation, whether it's about, McMindfulness or what, the long-term practitioner versus short, are we compromising this practice because, we're lightening it up? I feel like the conversation, it really needs to be around the criteria and the qualifications of the person teaching. And to me, the other part of the conversation isn't really as relevant. And I don't know why that's not taking more of center stage, because, if you've got somebody who's got a very deep practice, has been sitting retreats and working with teachers for years, and they're able to explain, describe, and teach these practices, I mean, ultimately, you can pretty much guarantee that they're not going to be compromising it.
Yeah, and let's unpack this a little bit more, because I think this is very rich a topic, that some of the criticisms are, it's not as deep as X, whatever that X may be, and yet you have data to show. And my pushback to some of those critics has often been, well, here are the numbers. What have you got? Where's your evidence? And I rarely get a response on that. In fact, I've never gotten a response on that. But you brought up something around the competency, the qualifications of those who are teaching. And I wanted to shift a little bit into the requirements that you have in your own staff and what you're looking for. Maybe you can share a little bit about your staff.
Sure. Yeah. This is the criteria I'll tell you that I really like to see before we bring somebody in, is that I want to see that they have sat at least 3 completely silent retreats, a minimum of 7 days each, that they've had a personal practice for 10 years. And within that 10-year period, I like to actually see, so we ask people to provide us with a retreat resume. And we want to see the 3 silent, 7 days each, but we want to see lots of other things as well. We want to see courses related to the practice, 1-day events, 5-day events. I mean, we just want to see, as much as somebody can remember over a 10-year period about their practice and what their home personal practice is like. And ideally, I'm looking for somebody that has some experience in their professional life with delivering programs, with facilitating programs, and because we are an organization that touches a whole variety of different industry, we really try to mix up our instructor pool so that we've got, so for instance, I have somebody on staff who is an economist, a lawyer, a former CEO. I've got a couple psychologists. I have an engineer. I have a former VP in the finance industry, and all of these people have very, very deep and longstanding practices, all with experience in instruction. And so, early on, I was able to really tap into a number of people that were local to the Boston area that had a lot of experience with practice, because in that's actually more important to me than their professional background, but the professional piece is important as well. Yeah, and then what we do is when we see a professional resume, we see their practice resume, and then what we do is we invite them in to audition. And I kind of don't really like the word audition, but I can't think of a better word, but we say, we have them come in for about, an hour to an hour and a half, and 30 minutes of that will be an intro to mindfulness. And we don't really tell them much else. We just basically say, we want to see you give an introduction to mindfulness, and you'll have a group of Harvard Pilgrim employees, many of whom have already taken a class, so they have some background. You may get a few people that don't have any, but we also kind of pre-plot people with questions, because what I'm looking for in responses is that I want to see that they understand the nuances of this practice. And so I can tell right away, Ted, I mean, in 5 minutes, I have a sense, and it might even be possible that the person doesn't have exactly all their, maybe they, instead of having 3 silent retreats, they've got 2, but then they have other things that sort of balance that off, and they might not be at the same level as some of our more senior teachers, but I see that they are going to be a real attribute and just may need a little coaching.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to hear this, because this is one of the criticisms we hear from the McMindfulness crowd is, how do we know these teachers are good teachers? And what I push back on is, I see criteria like what you just described in every corporate program. I don't see that in other areas that are again doing the comparison to, this isn't as good as X. Yep. That's based on, for the most part, from what I see, whim. And we see in those areas maybe teachers who, through the best intentions and great passion, may not have some of the skills and competencies and talents that we'd like to see from those who are going to be teaching this, because there is that great nuance that really needs to be elegantly and mindfully handled.
Yes, no, that's exactly it. And I want to underscore what you said, because I say this often as well, that I think there is great intention and integrity and desire to do this work. But I have seen people where I just am like, I think, come back and see me in a year, that I really get that authentic, genuine desire. And I would love to have them, but just not quite yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the phrase that was used by a teacher in the tradition that I started with was, the fruit is not yet ripe.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So I feel like we've got a good process. And, a lot of it for me too is that I think that, and it's funny, my years of practice and retreat work, I didn't even realize how handy that was going to come in. I really didn't, Ted. I mean, and I just, because when I see this word mindfulness defined, when people come in, it's like I can see really clearly that, okay, somebody's missing something significant here, or, they've almost got it, or they do have it. And yes.
And I think it says it very well that you're in particular looking for a long-term, deep practice, that is foundational to everything else, because it does manifest in these ways. And you see it in your own life with your own experience and how handy that has been to have had your retreat experience and your long-term practice.
Yes, without a doubt.
So I want to shift a little bit into still unpacking this idea of some of what we've heard from the critics of mindfulness programs within the corporate setting that you and I have both worked in, that there's an underlying intention around greed. And that's something I have not observed, not once in any of the programs that I've been a part of or delivered, nor others that I've spoken with who are living in the corporate world teaching mindfulness. I was wondering what your response is to that as someone who's created one of the foremost corporate programs in the U.S.
I have to say that I haven't seen that at all. I have not seen that when we go out and talk to organizations about bringing this program in. I honestly, they're not saying to us, we want to see employees be more productive. It's just that honestly hasn't come up at all. And I just think it's so interesting because I also have been involved online with some of the conversations around this exact topic. And I just say, but again, anybody who is teaching this that has a very deep and long-standing practice is not going to have that as a motivation or an intention and will redirect an organization that does. They'll just know, okay, you know what? This is not, they will really set them straight to say, look, this is what this is. This is not relaxation. This is not about, it's not about improving your bottom line. And of course, finessed in the right way, you're just, when we go out and consult with companies, first of all, that just really doesn't come up that much. I think it is something that one would imagine. If you're not actually going out there and walking into companies, you might imagine that a lot of companies would ask that, but it just has not been my experience. We've offered our programs in 167 companies. And we've trained over 10,000 people in some way, shape, or form with, could be an hour long or a multi-week or, a combination. And I am not faced with this question of, I want my employees to be, I'm going to do this because I want them to be more productive. And that there seems to be more of an altruistic desire on the part of the people we're speaking to in these many, many companies to support their employees.
Yeah, I think I liken this criticism to companies that offer flu vaccines or have other kinds of wellness programs for their staff. You could look at it, and I think this is a horrible spin in the wrong direction of, they just want employees who are going to work longer and harder as slaves to the man, to the institution. Or it could be people aren't getting sick, and that in itself is a good thing.
Yes, that's right. It is separate from they're going to be at work every day because they're not getting sick. There is the belief that, we care about our employees and want to keep them well. Now, of course, this is not always across the board how every senior leader is going to feel, but I am just speaking from my own experience that this is not what I'm hearing. I'm not hearing we want more productivity. And these happen to be things that generally wind up being sort of byproducts of a happier, healthier employee that has some more ease and presence and awareness. These are byproducts, but this is not the goal. And we would steer anybody away from that so that they understand exactly what they're going to be getting and can then make an informed decision like, oh, okay, I thought this was about focus and concentration and productivity. If this is not it, then we don't want you. And then that's okay. But that hasn't happened. But yeah.
And I think that often is helped by having those leaders who may come into this with those kinds of expectations to have some introductory sessions to learn a bit more about the practice, maybe go through a program themselves so that they see the benefits. They understand it from the point of having been through it and knowing it's not all about that bottom line and shifting that perspective. I think that's the finesse part. It isn't finesse of covering anything up. It's the finesse of, no, you need to understand this yourself so that you see how this works and what a great benefit is to people, not just at work, but in their home lives as well.
Yeah, exactly, Ted. In fact, I'm going to be in New York City in a couple weeks with a financial institution doing just that for a group of leaders and helping them to really see, like, I want to cut through common misconception because that misconception of this practice is still quite prevalent, especially among people who wouldn't, for whatever reason, normally come into contact with this. And so, I'm really delighted, and we've done this before too, but this is, to pull this group together in a couple weeks and really go through a 90-minute intro. This is what this is, and give them the opportunity to practice so that they can make an informed decision. Like, yes, we want to roll this out to this institution because now I've got a much better sense of what it is.
Tara, is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners?
I don't think so, Ted. I think I have, you've asked me most and I've responded most of what I wanted to say. There's nothing else I can think of at this time.
Well, for those who are listening who would like to find out more, you can go to the website www.harvardpilgrim.org/mindfulness. And of course, that's linked on the episode page for this episode. Tara, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ted. It was a pleasure. Really. Thank you.